So, what is ecology? Well, in the original definition, there are a lot of definitions, but an original definition is that it's simply the interactions between organisms and the environment. This captures a lot of different things. Maybe a better definition, and maybe a little more practical one, is the study of interactions that explain the distribution and abundance of living organisms. That is, when we look out there in the environment, we can ask ourselves three central questions as ecologists. Where do organisms occur? How many are there? And why are they there in the first place? So the proximate goal in studies of ecology is to identify and understand patterns in nature and to come up with explanations for why those may be, hypotheses. And to test those hypotheses. Is my thinking about how the world works, what explains the distribution, the abundance of these organisms, makes sense? And the ultimate goal is really to predict a future outcome, to create and test a theory. So if we have a theory about why organisms occur where they occur, then we should be able to make predictions about how they may present themselves in other places. So here's an example of identifying patterns and trying to come up with ideas as to why these patterns actually occur. This is a study of a system that I've done a little bit of work in, the soybean aphid, these tiny little sap-feeding insects introduced into this country that feed on the phloem, the phloem of plants. This is the sugar and photosynthate containing parts of the plants, and they can each reach very high densities. In this study by Rains, in 2010, they actually looked at the abundance of soybean aphids over time, over this 8-year period here. And what they found was something very interesting. One is that the populations over the course of the season, which you can see here, over the course of the season, increase as the season goes on. This is pretty typical of a lot of sap-feeding insects, a lot of organisms in general. They kind of grow as the plants mature and as temperature gets warmer. And you can see this pattern repeated in a few different years. But something else that you'll notice is that in some years you get these high populations, like 2001, in 2003, 2005. And in other years, you actually have very low populations, like the even years. So this was very interesting to these researchers. And they said, why do you have this alternating pattern of aphid abundance? Odd years it's high, even years it's low. So here's an example of an ecological question, identifying a pattern, abundance differences over time and abundance differences across different years, and then to try to explain why this pattern actually occurs. And one of the things that they proposed in this particular system was that in the high years, what you end up having is relatively few predators of these particular aphids. These are the main predators being lady beetles, that in those even years grow and establish populations too late in the summer to actually do anything to control those populations. But they overwinter as adults, and in the next year, in the even years, the predator populations are already high and they can keep the populations low. So this is an explanation for why this particular pattern may actually exist. There are many sub-areas of ecology. A simple way that has often been used to kind of classify the study of the organisms in the environment is to break them up into these three very commonly used areas of biological organization. One is to study the population of organisms. That is, understanding the numbers and abundance of organisms, of individual species. Another way is to organize the study in terms of understanding communities. And communities are assemblages of different kinds of species and how these species may interact with each other. So multiple species and their interactions. That's the study of community ecology. And a final way is to study ecosystem ecology. And this is understanding how organisms are responsible for moving and transforming matter and material, energy, elements in a system that includes not only the organisms themselves, but the abiotic components of the system. So this is ecosystem ecology. And in this course, we're actually going to spend time at each one of these levels. But the recognition that I want you to, but the important thing that I want you to keep in mind here is that these different elements overlap quite substantially. And so we're going to break it down in simple ways to kind of build up to the understanding of ecosystems. Here's some definitions of these different nested levels of biological organization, and where a lot of the work that we're going to be, a lot of the time that we're going to be spending in this class is really kind of at this level right here, like that. And also in ecology, like in this particular class, you can study interactions from very different perspectives. One is just understanding the essence, the basic ecology that is happening. And another is to understand how we can use this information to help manage our ecosystems, to help manage our natural resources, our agricultural systems, and so on. So in a sense, the applied aspect has consequences for people. And this is why we actually study insect ecology. And this is actually why we have departments of entomology in the first place. There aren't that many departments of ichthyology, for example. There's a unique relationship between people and insects that has made this discipline able to withstand the test of time, really. Just another word about the difference between basic ecology and applied ecology is that the basic ecology is an understanding of how the world works, creating and refining basic ecological theory. And there's a lot of active work in this area. Applied ecology is a branch of this, really, which is using those ecological principles to solve real world problems, human-related problems associated with agriculture, conservation, restoration, pest management, invasive species. And we're going to be working across both of these areas we're going to be studying across both of these areas in this class. So here's an example of a basic pattern. One observation that researchers have made over the years is that species richness tends to peak at near the equator. So here's an example here of mammal species. Okay, not insects, but very similar patterns with insects. You tend to get more mammal species that occur in these areas right around the equator here. Here's a map of kind of more species, in these areas here. And this is just a different way of showing it. Latitude south, the equator, and latitude north. And this is the number of species right here. And you can see this kind of peak at near the equator. And you can ask yourself, is this pattern repeatable? Do other organisms actually show this? Is this an interesting question? Should we even care about this? And I want you to kind of ruminate over that a little bit. Are all patterns really worth studying in the first place? Here's a contrast to this particular pattern. That for some groups of insects, like ichneummonid species, ichneummonid wasps, these are parasitic wasps, their species richness tends to peak at mid-latitudes here, not near the equator. These are the subtropics right here, but near kind of north temperate areas here. So why is that? Why do you get different patterns of species richness with some insect groups compared to those mammalian groups? There are entire journals that are devoted to the study of the application of ecology to these practical questions, like the Journal of Ecological Applications, Journal of Applied Ecology. These are just to mention a few. And they deal with things like use of understanding predators in agricultural systems. Here's a penetomid bug feeding on a beetle larva of some kind, invasive species, and how we can understand their distribution and potentially their management, species of conservation concern, like rare and threatened species or endangered species, or species that carry out important functions that people care about, like pollination or predation, like this middle one here. So these are all areas of active research, and we're going to straddle this very readily. What I hope in this course is that the answer to this particular question here, why study insect ecology, will become more and more obvious as we engage with the material.